Story 1. I think I saw a Wendigo through the train window. It is as the title states. I am fairly certain that I saw a Wendigo out the window of the train. If that were the only event that happened, then I wouldn't have any reason to tell my story. In order to get into what happened, let me start off at the beginning of my day. It was a normal Saturday as far as I was concerned. I stayed up until about 3 a.m. playing the newest online mobile game with my brothers. Yes, I know. It is considered a sin to cheat by using my brother's screens to determine who the imposter is, but I'm not getting into that debate right now. I woke up not too long after 9 a.m., played on my phone a while, and then hopped out of bed, threw on the same clothes I had on the day before, and headed downstairs to the kitchen. I threw together my favorite breakfast food while my brothers, both groggily, dragged their feet to meet me. My twin brother, Gabe, decided to shower to wake himself up, while my younger brother, Zach, decided to partake in the feast of homemade waffles with peanut butter and chocolate milk. By the time Gabe was dressed and sitting at the kitchen table, Zach and I had already finished putting the dishes into our dishwasher and cleaned off the table. I had packed in advance and my train wasn't for a few more hours, so my brothers and I had pulled our phones out and began terrorizing the servers of Among Us for a little while. After we grew tired from the online insults and cyberbullying that we received for cheating, we played some Mortal Kombat on our PS4. It was a very relaxing morning, all things considered. As I prepared to collect my luggage and leave for the train station, I reiterated the food plans to my siblings. The roast is in the slow cooker. All you'll have to do is clean up. It is going to be finished at 6 today, and if you aren't sure if it's done, then shoot me a picture. I continued speaking over my Gabe's attempts of assuring me that they'd be fine without me. Remember, tomorrow is oven-baked chicken fingers and fries. After school Monday is burgers, and you can order anything you want for Tuesday and pay a tip. I rushed my sentence as Gabe held the front door of our tiny rented house open for me. Chrissy, we'll be fine, okay? Chill out, okay? Gabe chuckled to himself. You're right, you'll be fine. Do your homework. I love you guys. See you Wednesday. I called to them as I headed down the paved driveway and towards the bus stop down the road. Hasta la vista, baby. As Zach yelled my favorite movie reference of all time at me, I couldn't help but smile. They'll be fine. I raised them well, I thought to myself. I looked at them waving in the open front door and gave them a very flat and stern expression. I'll be back. I deepened my voice as best as possible before smiling and heading back towards the bus stop. My parents were extremely busy people all our lives. Gabe was born with a learning disability and required more attention from my parents than I needed. I had to grow up and mature faster to be able to take care of Gabe, as our mother was a full-time principal in our local school and a part-time student tutor, while my father worked as a warehouse manager full-time and was often working the midnight shifts. He worked those shifts due to the employees' reputations to be unproductive. He always said he needed to straighten them out. My father would sleep all day, and my mother would work all day. I would always prepare Gabe's lunches and walk him to school, walk him home and make him dinner. I helped him with his homework. I read him bedtime stories. I tucked him into bed. I was always there for him. Zach was born a week before my 9th birthday with Gabe. By now, Gabe had quickly matured, surprising everyone. He was potentially even smarter and more socially acceptable than I was, though he didn't have the same parenting skills that I had developed and therefore wasn't entirely confident in even turning on an oven or setting a microwave timer. Anyways, by the time Zach came around, I was well aware that I'd have to raise him too. I so desperately wanted my mom and dad to be real parents for little Zach, to be there for him and be what Gabe and I never had. But I knew deep down inside that that wouldn't happen. By the time Gabe and I were 18 and Zach had just turned 9, the three of us moved out and into our own apartment. I wasn't even sure that our parents would notice Zach's absence, to be honest. They had no issues with us all moving in together. They said to me themselves that they knew Zach was better off with us than them. They said he was never supposed to be, which entirely angered me. Because of this, Gabe and I started to call Zach our miracle brother. Despite our age gap, the three of us were extremely close with one another. It was us three against the world. Nobody would change that. Then about a year ago, I fell in love with my old high school crush. His name is Brian. We were always close friends since grade 9, but as high school came to a close and we parted ways for university, we confessed our love. It was a very corny movie moment to me. Even though long distance, we made our relationship work. Gabe and Zach were obviously jealous that Brian was taking all of my attention. They were afraid that Brian was going to take me away from them. All that aside, they liked my boyfriend. They were all friendly and had good laughs together. They were happy for us. So here I am, at the train station awaiting my train to my boyfriend on our first year anniversary. I anxiously awaited the train, wondering with me when I got back. Maybe they were mad already, or maybe they aren't upset at all. I talked myself into thinking that I was doing the right thing. Even though my stomach was turning violently, I was feeling very nauseous. It had nothing to do with anything I ate. I had a horrible feeling. Something inside me was telling me that something bad was going to happen. I didn't listen to it at the time. I thought it was all just the nerves of traveling. I was just too excited to see Brian. The train was quite long. It went from my small little town of southern Ontario to the northern and frigid climate that is stereotypically portrayed as all of Canada. Overall, the trip to Brian's apartments was close to 12 hours, however. That includes the train ride along with the bus and the drive that Brian has to take from his apartment to where I arrive on the train and back to his apartment. I had boarded the train and was seated when one of the train staff members asked to scan my ticket. I quickly apologized for not being prepared and dug through my luggage to find my ticket. After ensuring that I was settled and asking if I had wanted any food or drink for the ride, the staff member had moved along down the aisle. I looked around the car, noticing only 3 other passengers before pulling out my laptop from my bag and popping my headphones into my ears. I sent a text to my parents informing them of my absence from my hometown for the next few days and threw on some YouTube. Gaming channels were always a favorite, but recently Gabe had gotten me hooked onto a game theory channel. I could sit there for hours watching the different conspiracy theories about video game lore, and for the first half of my trip, that's exactly what I did. The early winter sunset filled the skies with orange and pink highlights as I had decided to put my laptop away and watch the window with my music playlist on. I had always enjoyed listening to music on long trips, especially across the country. I tried to imagine cheesy movie scenes taking place in the open fields with slow songs playing and faceless couples slow dancing. Within about an hour after I first peered out my window, the snow had begun. At first it was a light flurry, hardly visible as the train sped along the tracks. Eventually it was blizzarding. Simply looking outside gave me chills, as I never enjoyed being in the snow. Snow is pretty, but from afar, I'd always say. I shivered underneath my thick leather jacket as the train came to a slow stop in a remote northern town. This was not my stop, as the train station itself was visibly the largest building in the entire town. Anyone could stand on one end of the town and see the other side down the road, even in the blizzard-like conditions that were present. As the train waited, I kept my eyes focused outside my window. No passengers had left the car, and no additional passengers had boarded. I found this to be very strange, as the train needed to always stay on schedule. Little time was available for simply stopping. There must have been something wrong with one of the employees or the conductor, or possibly even the train itself. Attention passengers, we apologize for the delay. We will continue on our trip in 5 minutes. Once again, we apologize for the delay. We thank you for choosing to ride with us and enjoy your evening. The overhead speakers broke through my thoughts and pulled me back into reality. I simply looked around the car for a moment and then texted Brian to let him know of the 5-minute delay. When I looked back outside my window again was when I saw it. The tall figure was hunched over and with its back towards me. I could see the back of its white skull and its antlers broken and distorted. It was extremely frail, its limbs impossibly long and spindly. The creature was in the tree line across the town. Hardly any specific details were noticeable through the extreme snow. However, I recognized right away the creature. Doubt had settled in almost as fast as the creature seemed to appear. Has it always been there? Was my mind playing tricks on me? It became more and more obvious the longer I gawked at it. How had I not noticed it until now? What the hell? I whispered under my breath. At the moment I was so quiet that I wasn't even sure I had said it out loud. Just as soon as I questioned, the creature whirled its head at a near 180-degree angle to face me. The black pits for eyes stared deep into my soul. This creature had heard me, and now this creature had seen me. I was sure of it. Its mouth unhinged, and an animal's corpse fell out, blood spilling everywhere. Whatever this creature had been consuming was too mangled to determine what it really was. The train jolted to life and crawled across the tracks, gradually gaining speed. I was startled from the sudden movement and jumped nearly out of my seat. The creature only stared as I sped off. I scrambled to get my laptop out of my bag and reconnect it to the train's Wi-Fi. I spent the last 2.5 hours of my trip researching the creature. This is where I had learned of its name, Wendigo. This creature had been a part of native folklore for many generations. I nearly couldn't hold my dinner when I read about the stories of cannibals becoming Wendigos hundreds of years ago. After reading other people's close encounters online, I was more and more convinced that what I saw was real. I was ready to move on and forget about my encounter with the Wendigo by the time I stepped off the train. I practically fell into Brian's arms and broke down, a mixture of fear and emotions of sadness and loneliness overtaking me all at once. I was grateful to be there with him, in his arms when I needed him most. I told him about my encounter with the cryptid on the drive back to his apartment. "I believe that you definitely saw something," he began, his doubt unintentionally present in his voice. "I just don't believe that a creature like that exists at all. Like, how come the only solid proof of its existence are tall tales and folklore?" I dunno, Brian. I quietly looked to my feet. He reached one of his hands off the wheel and held mine firmly and reassuringly. I don't know what it is, I guess. It feels real to me." "Well, that's good enough for me," he said calmly. "That's enough reason for me to keep you safe." His classic cute grin formed on his face, revealing only a few of his nearly perfect white teeth. "Oh, you need a reason to keep me safe?" I jokingly said, as if he had said something offensive. "Well, no. I, he stumbled over his words. "Uh-huh." I made it comically clear that I was not believing him. Brian had managed to make me forget all about my terrible experience hours ago. We were laughing and joking around as he pulled into his parking space in his apartment complex. The building itself hadn't been very tall, only about 10 stories. The building itself was nearly completely surrounded by dark Canadian woods. His town wasn't very large, only about 8,000 residents. Beautiful, lush, evergreen forests surrounded the little city, with nearly every house having its own tree in the front lawn. Sparkling white snowflakes gently fell around me as I stepped out of Brian's car. The parking lot was lightly covered in snow before I had managed to make it to the entrance of the building. Brian, like the gentleman he is, carried my luggage from the car and to the apartment. He was talking about one of the regular customers at his fast food part-time job when I cut him off. "Listen," I said in a hushed whisper. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Goosebumps formed all over my body. Someone was watching us. I could feel it. I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "I don't hear anything, Chris." "Exactly. It's so quiet. There weren't any noises around. Not a single sound. Only the eerie dead silence." "Is it always this quiet? In the middle of the night?" "Yeah, it is." Brian wasn't making me feel any better. "What's wrong, Chrissy? Are you still spooked? Let's just go inside. I don't like it out here." I clung onto his arm and rushed towards the front doors. Once inside and in the elevator, I told him what I read online. I explained that the absence of any natural noises or wild animals typically means there's a predator around. With his apartment complex close to some dark woods, I wasn't very calm. I also told him how I felt that we were being watched from something in the woods. "Babe, your nerves are probably just shot." He held me close to him, trying to calm me down. "I promise you're safe here. It's gone. I promise." He drifted off. That night I dreamed that the creature had followed us. I saw from its point of view as it followed our car towards Brian's apartment. I watched as it watched us get out of the car and head inside. And I saw as it crawled into bed behind me, holding me in place. "Don't move," it hissed. It's a hot breath on my ear. I woke up in a cold sweat. Brian was sound asleep beside me, looking peaceful as ever. I went to the kitchen and got myself a glass of water. I put on my warm, fuzzy housecoat over my pajamas and stood outside on the balcony. Some fresh air would do me good, I thought to myself. It was 3:20 in the morning, and there I was on the balcony of the 7th floor, contemplating a cigarette. I wanted to quit ever since I had taken ownership of my brothers, but on that balcony, I felt as though I had so desperately needed one. Feeling ashamed of myself for even considering one, I threw the only cigarette I had off the balcony. I needed to get a hold of myself before I returned home. I couldn't let Zach see me like this. Gabe would scold me if he were here, I thought. Wiping tears off my face, I looked around the tree line. I was just starting to regain my composure when I noticed something out of place. In the tree line was the deer skull. The horrid creature's body was undoubtedly attached to it. It just stared at me. I whirled around and nearly dove inside Brian's apartment. I slammed the balcony glass door shut and locked it. As I headed to make sure the front door was locked, Brian intercepted me, forcing a scream out of me. "What's the matter, Christina?" Brian held me by my arms. I wouldn't stop wailing. All that I could get out was, "It's following me," in between the sobs. He held me in a close hug until I was calm enough to explain my nightmare and about the creature I saw mere moments ago. "Stay here," he said as he headed towards the balcony and took a look outside. I watched as he unlocked the door and stepped onto the balcony. A chill went down my spine, but not because of the wintry night air flowing into the apartment. Brian just stood there, staring at one spot. After a long pause, he slowly backed into the apartment, not taking his eyes off the creature outside. I knew he saw it. I knew he believed me. I could see it in his face. His eyes wide with fear, his mouth only slightly ajar. Without looking at me, he said, "The parking lot is in the back of the complex. Get your things. We can't stay here." "Are you crazy? That thing is outside. It's following me." I nearly yelled, panic setting in. I felt as though I was going to vomit. That thing. It told me Brian was in terror. I don't know how, but it told me that it was going to come inside. I gasped, tears streaming down my face. "We have to go," he urged. I grabbed his hand and he grabbed his keys, and we rushed out the front door. We ran to the elevator and rapidly hit the down button. I decided that taking the stairs was faster and bolted through the door towards the stairs, Brian following right behind me. Reaching the stairwell, I looked to the bottom before descending the stairs. About halfway down the first flight, I heard heavy tapping coming from the bottom. I leaned over the banister and saw the undead deer creature making its way up the stairs. Brian nearly bumped into me as I spun around and sprinted up the stairs crying and screaming. He followed my lead without question as I headed towards the elevator, doors just beginning to open. We both cramped ourselves into the elevator and Brian rapidly pushed the ground floor button. Just as the double doors slowly closed, we saw the stairwell doorway open and the animal's snout making its way towards us. We held each other, Brian verbally praying and me regretting most of my past life's choices. Ground floor and parking the elevator dinged, cueing us to make our hasty escape. We ran like our lives depended on it, because in those long moments, they did. On our way to Brian's car, I slipped and fell into the snow. Brian, who was ahead of me, turned around and prepared to help me up. "No, go. Start the car. Go." I yelled frantically as I slowly made my way to my feet. He spun around and ran towards the car again. I took one step forward and fell to my knees, pain pulsing through my ankle. I loudly groaned in pain, clenching my teeth. I managed to get to my feet and half limp, half jog to the car. Just as I closed the passenger door, the front doors of the apartment complex were violently torn from their hinges. The creature held nothing back as it sprinted on all fours towards the car. "Hang on." Brian shifted the car into drive and floored it. Normally, the wintry road conditions would have evoked anxiety in me, but right now I felt as though Brian wasn't driving fast enough. I kept my eyes glued to the rear view mirror, watching the creature gallop towards us, its skinny form seemingly moving in unnatural angles with each step. "Are you all right?" Brian asked of deep concern, his eyes trained on the road ahead. "I think that I broke my ankle. I managed to get out in between breaths." He cursed under his breath. "I don't think we can get you to a hospital with that thing on our asses," Brian thought out loud. "Did you bring your phone?" I asked him. "I'm going to call the police." "Damn it. No, I left mine at the apartment," Brian said plainly. I quietly sobbed as I too had left my phone in the rush. "We are going to die tonight, aren't we?" I said out loud, not wanting an answer. "No, babe, don't say that. Things are going to be fine. We'll make it out of this. Will we? Will we actually, Brian?" I yelled at him. Tears streamed down his face too. He was terrified, just like me, and yet he was trying to protect me and keep me calm. I stumbled an apology in between sobs, but Brian cut me off. "It's gone." He slowed the car to a stop and looked all around. "Where did it go?" "It's gone." "Where did it go?" I too began to look around, unease settling in. I'm not sure what was more horrific, seeing the creature pursue us or not being able to see it but feel that it was still there. We sat there in the car for a long while, just looking around desperately. In the distance down the road, I noticed headlights. I pointed them out to Brian, and he flashed his high beams off and on. The car pulled over to the side of the road, and Brian got out to talk to the driver. I bit my lip, not enjoying the idea of Brian getting out of the car. "Please, call the police. We need an ambulance, too." I heard Brian talk to the driver. Just as Brian made his way back to the car, the creature came out of the darkness and took him in its grasp. It happened so quickly. He was just gone. Only a few drops of blood on the ground to prove that he was even there. The man in his car across the road screamed and sped off. I sat there, stunned and no doubt in shock. The monster rammed into my passenger side door head first, breaking me from my trance. It broke through the window and shoved its face towards me. I struggled against my seatbelt and repeatedly kicked it in its hollow skull. It caught my leg in its mouth and clamped its jaws down hard. I screamed from the pain, blood pooling around my wounds. I heard the horrific sound of my leg being bitten through as the beast crunched through bone. All I could do was scream. Biting down on my other leg, it pulled me through the window. I screamed for my life, but it was no use. With ease it had flung me face first into a nearby tree, and everything went black instantly. My entire body seared with pain as blurry images of men and women in police uniforms and rescue uniforms loaded me onto a bed and into an ambulance. I was drifting in and out of consciousness. When I had finally come to full consciousness, I was in a hospital bed and hooked up to countless pieces of machinery. I had a feeding tube and an oxygen tube in me. My arm had an 4 in it, heartbeat monitors attached to my chest. The nurse reading my file gasped when she saw me awake and rushed out of the room. The PA system announced several doctors to where I assumed I was located. Within minutes, the doctors were unhooking the feeding tube and oxygen tube, as I had no longer needed them. We expected you to be in a coma for at least another month. One of the doctors explained to me after the tubes were removed. Another month? I asked before clearing my throat. It still felt as though I had those plastic tubes shoved down my throat. You were out for 6 weeks. You were in a very brutal car accident. While waiting for the emergency vehicles to arrive, you were attacked by an animal. It was a very horrible scene. I blankly stared at him. Don't you remember Christine? He cocked his head to the side and gave me a quizzical look. It's Christina, I corrected him. And no, I don't, I lied. I laid there for hours remembering the horrible nightmare that happened to me nearly 2 months ago. My whole body ached and pulsed with pain. I could hardly move. I thought about Brian for the longest time. I assumed he had to be dead, but he had shown up later that night. I came as soon as I heard that you were awake, he told me as he leaned over and kissed my forehead. After the creature had attacked me, it went for you. I watched as it threw you against the tree. I tried to pull it off you, but it threw me away. It told me that it wanted you. It told me that you saw something that you weren't supposed to see. Brian explained. By the time the police and ambulances showed up, the creature had already left. I never saw it leave. It was just somehow gone. I rode with you in the back. The officers recorded it as a bear attack. They didn't believe my story. Brian went on to say that he was administered into the hospital for a day with only flesh wounds and stitches. He said that he and my brothers and parents visited me nearly every day or so. My parents came? I asked, stunned. He nodded, giving me a half smile. In fact, they gave me a call on my way here. They're headed up with your brothers. They said that they'll try to get here before breakfast. When they got the call that you were awake, they pretty much dropped what they were doing and hopped in the car. I teared up and smiled. What did you tell them about what happened? The police told them what they thought happened. I went with it because I want them to like me. I giggled. Then I struggled to sit up. Brian rushed over to give help and sit me up. I reached down to scratch my leg, but I couldn't quite find the spot. Hey, hon, can you help me? I've got an itch and I can't reach it. I'm too sore to be reaching down. I looked at Brian, and he smiled back at me. Sure, babe, whereabouts? My left leg, just below the kneecap. Brian went pale suddenly. What's wrong? I removed the blankets as a wave of adrenaline washed over me. Both of my legs were gone from just above the knees. I was still coping with my new handicap when my younger brothers, accompanied by my parents, rushed into the room and nearly knocked the wind out of me in a big hug each. Guys, I'm okay. I'm all right. I laughed a little out loud from pure happiness. They said you might not wake up, Zack sobbed as he held me close. They, they were talking to Mom and Dad about having to pull the plug on you. Gabe said grimly. Aw, guys, doctors aren't always right. Look, I'm fine. Then I looked at my parents, both of them clearly holding back tears. We love you so much, Christina. Don't you ever think otherwise. My mom's voice is on the verge of breaking. Come back and live with us, okay? You'll be needing someone to look after you. My father chimed in. I'll have Gabe dash I started. We've moved back in with Mom and Dad, Gabe said, giving me a warm smile. I looked over to Brian, who gave me a, you should listen to them, look with a smile to top it off. I'll come back home. When they let me out of here, I couldn't finish. I cried of happiness. My parents loved me after all. My parents embarrassed me in a hug each, and my dad stepped out of the room to talk to one of the nurses. How was the drive up? I asked my mom, wiping a tear from my face. Oh, not too bad. The first few hours there was a little snow, but once we passed through the Oshawa, Toronto area, it wasn't too bad. Oh, nice. I trailed off. Oh, oh, Chrissy. Zach grew excited. I saw something really cool on the drive up. Oh, that's right. Go on. Tell your sister. My mom encouraged me. It was a bear-looking creature, but it was wearing this animal skull. I think it was a deer's skull. And the bear looked really skinny and tall. Isn't that something? My mom looked at me. I just looked at Brian. I knew I was probably as pale as he was at that moment. I didn't see anything. Gabe stated matter-of-factly. I ignored him. Yeah, it was freaky. Gabe missed it. I saw it too. I don't think your father saw it. My mother's voice grew distant as I stared at Brian. Are you okay? You don't look so good. Someone asked me, but I wasn't sure who. Maybe you all should go home early. I'll bring Chrissy back down when she's out of the hospital. Brian said, you all have lives to get back to. Oh, Brian, that's so sweet of you, but we'll pass. We've got a hotel room nearby, and we took the boys off school. My mom said in her fake cheery voice. Mom, I stated in the most serious tone I could muster up. Listen to me very carefully. You have seen something that you weren't meant to see. That thing. It's on its way right now. I teared up. It's coming to find you. And little Zachy? Story 2. I was sent to hunt a man who turned into a Wendigo. I failed miserably. All right, I'm not much of a writer, but I've been stuck for hours and I'm bored as hell. So here goes nothing. I'm part of a team that captures, but mostly kills, monsters. And when I say monsters, I mean legitimate monsters. Stuff like chupacabras, manticores, werewolves, and so on and so forth. We're not unique, not by any means. There are hundreds of teams dedicated to the same thing all over the world. And my team isn't necessarily the best one out there, but we're good, and I trust my teammates with my life, all four of them. We've been on dozens of missions, and I used to think that we were prepared for anything. But now, one of my teammates is dead, and the rest of us are injured and stuck in the back of an armored truck with a 3-meter tall Wendigo screeching outside. I'm going to be stuck here for the foreseeable future, and my teammates are all unconscious. So I've got nothing but time. I guess I'll start with how I got into this business and how it works. It'll explain how I got into this mess. I was in the military, not going to say where, and I was good. Extremely good. Incredibly gifted in terms of both physical and mental strength. Good with weapons, too. I never thought it would really mean much. Where I come from, the military is conscription-based, which basically means that if you're a man, you're mandated to drop everything and serve in the military for 2 years. If you don't go to the military, you go to jail instead. Fun. I figured I'd just serve my 2 years, finish, go to university, get a degree in mechanical engineering, and live out the rest of my life. I thought all my military accomplishments would serve for nothing, but just an interesting tidbit about me. But clearly, that wasn't the case. Just a few weeks before my 2 years were up, I was pulled into a room, which I never knew existed, and I was immediately met with some of the highest ranking officers I've seen in my life. Initially, I thought they found out about the empty shell casing I smuggled out from Alive, firing for a souvenir a couple months ago, and I was bracing myself for a court-martial and a trip to the detention barracks. Hey, I never said I was good at following rules, but that wasn't the case. They told me how impressed they were by my performance, and they were transferring me to a special team based in another country, one whose name I've never heard of, made up of elite soldiers from all over the world. I would go there and continue training for another 4 years, and I would actually be sent out on real military operations. And I wasn't allowed to say no, either. Initially, I was pissed. I had dreams, aspirations, stuff I actually wanted to do. Not to mention I had just got a girlfriend, and we were still in the honeymoon phase. The idea of just dropping everything and being forced into military service again was maddening. That, and the whole real military operations thing. I mean, sure, I could hit 100% of the targets at the firing range, do 95 clean push-ups in a minute, and run for kilometers with a 15-kilogram bag strapped to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean I could fight terrorists or anything. I wanted to argue, make them change their mind, and think I wasn't a good fit for it. Maybe even tell them about the shell casing. But before I could voice my protest, they showed me the pay. Oh my God, the pay. So much money. And they promised it would only go up. Now, where I live, the cost of living is high. Very high. Not to mention, I was a little money hungry at the time. I didn't want to become an engineer for the sense of accomplishment, if you get my meaning. So not only did I need the money, I wanted the money. I had a lot of stuff to pay for. I would have to get a house, a car, and a wedding ring for the girlfriend. Yes, I was planning on proposing. Oh, and also steroids. I take steroids. So, I went along with it. I got all my things together, hugged the parents, kissed the girlfriend, had one last drink with the boys, and went off to another country. Went to a base in the middle of nowhere with a team made up of 20 people. Yup, the whole base for 20 people. I can still hear Wendigo screaming. It's very distracting, just so you know. Back to the story. And then the training started. It was brutal, way worse than anything I've ever experienced. At least in the regular military, safety is a concern, albeit not a huge one. Here, safety was unheard of. The trainers, which is all I can call them, since there were no ranks on the base, pushed us as hard as humanly possible, and sometimes inhumanely. Once, they gave us no food for a week. Another time, they snuck into our bunk and turned OFF the safeties on our guns. We had live rounds loaded, by the way. We were supposed to keep our guns loaded and with us at all times. We got screamed at for hours for that one. They said if we were real soldiers, we wouldn't have let that happen. Many times I wanted to punch one of them right in the face. It's a literal miracle everyone made it to the end of training with their sanities and bodies intact. Maybe the steroids had something to do with that. I had to hide my use back in my home country, but here they actively encouraged it. They even bought us needles and everything. Reason being was, according to them, if injecting yourself with a gram of testosterone every week makes you run faster, lift heavier, recover quicker, and just basically be a better soldier, then you should do it. At the end of training, we were briefed on our operations too. They told us we were going to see and do things we never would have imagined. They told us monsters were real. Initially, we all laughed, and then were punished for laughing. They made us run 5 kilometers, then continued the briefing. They told us we would be hunting monsters, but only those that were a threat to people. And we wouldn't always kill them, sometimes just capture them, because some monsters, like minotaurs, produce certain substances that can cure disease. Meanwhile, peaceful creatures, like Sasquatch, would be left alone. All of this said with a straight face. I still thought it was all a big joke. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But then they showed us videos. I still remember them, frame for frame. Monsters eating people, tearing people apart, nightmare stuff. And not to mention the video quality. You can't fake stuff that well. They sent us on our first mission a week after, put us on a private jet, and flew us off to Japan. Said we were looking for something called Gashadakuro, supposed to be a giant skeleton that eats people. Which I mean, how do you keep the public unaware of something like that? A skeleton as big as a tree, just walking around, straight out of Clash Royale. What? So I clash a little. Big deal. I've got to hand it to the cover-up guys. They don't get the credit they deserve. We found it eventually. Two of them. Actually, wasn't hard to be honest. They were over 20 meters tall in the middle of a rice field. According to legend, these things were supposed to only attack lone travelers. The village they had just massacred said otherwise. They saw us, let out a bellow, and sprinted straight at us. We ran straight towards the nearby tree line, hoping the oak trees would impede the monsters. One guy wasn't so lucky. He was always the slowest during group runs. He got snatched up, and the skeleton just bit his head clean off. At least his death was instant. Thank God for that. Speaking of instant deaths, I can still hear Wendigo shuffling around outside. Maybe I should speed up my riding a bit. We took down both of the monsters with rockets. Now, according to folklore, from hundreds of years ago, the Gashadakuro are supposed to be invincible. But they didn't have RPGs hundreds of years ago, did they? When all you've got is a spear against a skeleton 15 times your size, it's going to seem invincible. Props to people from ancient times. I don't know how they survived against these things. So that was my first encounter with the supernatural. We went on a lot more missions after that. Eventually, as we got better, we started getting split up into smaller teams. I started to actually enjoy it. I was only interested in money in the beginning, but a sense of accomplishment started coming with it. I remember the first time I really felt proud of what I did. We were in some town in Greece, with a really small population, less than 10,000. There was a manticore absolutely demolishing the place. It was tearing its way through a row of houses when we came across it, busting through a wall while a family on the other side was screaming for help. We took it down and went to check on the family. There was a little girl, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, who ran up and hugged me. My heart melted a little. I'm not going to lie. I've always been fond of children. Her parents were probably scared of us, a bunch of guys with heavy weaponry and armor, but she wasn't. She just knew we saved her life, and she was thankful. I really thought about the impact of my job on that day. So, I was making bank and loving my job. Life was far from perfect, but it was good. And then one day it came. The mission that screwed up my entire life. We were sent off to Canada. There was a confirmed Wendigo presence in a forest very near a town, and people were starting to disappear. We had to take it down ASAP. Not a capture, a kill. Now, this Wendigo was particularly interesting. It used to be a human. That's pretty rare, apparently. Most Wendigos were made by a spirit in the sky or something, and the real ones are a lot stronger than the people who become Wendigos. This specific Wendigo used to be a guy named Ned Terrell. He went off into the forest with his girlfriend, ironically, to look for a Wendigo, and they got lost in a blizzard or something. Then a few weeks later he turned up and started eating people. A bunch of doctors just figured he lost it, and they locked him up. They said he had convinced himself he was a Wendigo, and that it was best for everyone that he stay locked in his room for the rest of his life. He even wrote a letter, pretending he was a Wendigo that got captured by humans. Creepy stuff. But the thing is, Mr. Terrell wasn't so crazy after all. A couple months after they locked him up, the doctors noticed something. He was growing. A lot. Now, Terrell was already a pretty big guy. About 2 meters, if I remember his profile correctly. Then one day, one of the doctors, I think his name was Bowman, realized he was a lot taller. They measured him, and he was 2.18 meters tall. A while after that, he was 2.34 meters. But even though he kept growing taller, he kept losing weight. Started at svelte 80 kilograms. He was pretty underweight after living in the forest and eating people for a couple months, and ended at 56 kilograms. And he kept getting stronger too. One day he leapt at the guards and took a chunk out of one guy's arm. Thank God for tranq darts. They hit him with enough stuff to take down an elephant. That was the day they decided they had to transfer him out to a more secure facility. They knew they were dealing with something they didn't have the ability to handle. So they threw him into a truck and transported him to a maximum security prison that was a couple hours away. At least that was the plan. Halfway there, he ate the driver. The guards busted out and ran off. Pretty soon, reports of a giant, emaciated man running through the forest and roaring his head off reached us. We sent a scout who identified it, or I guess him, as a Wendigo, and my team was sent in. Now, according to legend, humans can turn into Wendigos when they choose to resort to cannibalism instead of starving. Or they can be possessed and forced to commit cannibalism by Wendigos. Which one is Terrell? Personally, I'm hoping he's the second option. At least that way, he dies with his humanity intact. The sounds outside have died down a little. Mr. Terrell must have gotten bored. I can relax a bit. We went out into the forest, the 5 of us. Body armor, assault rifles, grenades, rockets, all of it. We thought we could take him. We could not. It started off so slowly. We found its tracks and started following them. There was a blizzard going on, which is apparently something Wendigos can do. There's a blizzard going on now, actually, but my team had no problems. We followed them in our armored truck for an hour or so. Then all of a sudden, it was just on top of us. Never saw where it came from. Unbelievable speed. It tore my teammate out of the driver's seat and swallowed him whole. He was a big dude too. 1.9 meters tall and built like a young Brock Lesnar. Just got swallowed up, starting from the feet. He screamed the whole time too. I'll never forget it. The Wendigo just unhinged its jaws and leapt on him. One movement, he was suddenly swallowed up to his waist. The truck crashed and the rest of us jumped out and ran for cover. I'll admit it. Even professionals get scared. We just watched our teammate get eaten. Took a while, too. He was screaming and begging, one arm pinned to his side and the other flailing around. He had broken the #1 rule. Always have your gun loaded and with you. So there was nothing he could do. It took us a few seconds, but we opened fire. The Wendigo was squatting on top of the truck, its jaws now around the guy's chest. We killed our teammate, but he was dead anyway. We just granted him mercy. We emptied our mags at that thing, and we only hit it twice. Visibility was poor due to the blizzard, and like I said, it was fast. Seriously, faster than anything I've ever seen. It stood up, and it was huge. Absolutely dwarfed us. It was thin as a rake, too, ribs nearly tearing through its skin, skeletal arms, kneecaps very visible. I saw a photo of a family of Indian villagers during the Madras famine once. It looked just like them, very human looking. Just looking at its face, you would think it was just a starving man. I saw a picture of Mr. Terrell back when he was a regular guy. You could definitely tell it was him. It tipped the truck over and sprinted straight for us, lashed out, tearing through our armor like it was cardboard. One of us, I don't even remember who, got a grenade off. Unfortunately, not a direct impact, but still made it back off for a while at least. We jumped straight into the back of the truck and put it into lockdown mode. If you're slow and can't figure out what lockdown mode does, it locks the truck down. Metal covers sliding over the windows, a bunch of electronic locks, makes it a fortress. Unfortunately, it also prevents it from driving, because the wheels withdraw into the body. The Wendigo started slamming on the doors, but it couldn't get in. It's strong, but not that strong. So that brings us back to where we started. I sent a distress signal out a while ago, but I got no response. The blizzard may be blocking our communications. The snow's coming down really hard. It's freezing, even with the truck's heater. I'm really hungry for some reason, too. I can't have been here for more than a couple hours, but I'm absolutely starving. Even the time I didn't get food for a week at base wasn't this bad. I'm ravenous, but there's no food, and I sure as hell am not going out there. I won't make it very far. My teammates are still out for the count. I don't really know what to do now. I can't hear the Wendigo, but as long as the blizzard's here, I know it's out there. There's a video feed of the outside, but I turned it off. I need to conserve energy. The last time I saw the Wendigo, it was eating the snow my teammates' blood spilled on. This thing leaves no traces. It would probably lick blood off the walls if it could. It can't get in, but I can't go out. The situation seems pretty hopeless. But hey, if you're reading this, that means I made it out. I'm typing on the Notes app on my phone, so the only way for someone to see this is if I get out of here. I'm going to take a little break and think about what to do now. Goodbye. Hey guys, I found this story on a phone in the back of a wrecked truck I came across while hiking through the woods. I called the cops as soon as I saw it, but I snooped through it to find any valuables. Sorry, and I found this. What do you guys think? It's probably just some BS, right? I mean, there aren't any bodies in the truck, or blood even, which, if this is real, should be the case. There was a really heavy blizzard a day ago, but that's just regular Canadian weather, right? Wendigos and monsters, they're made up, right? Maybe some aspiring writer crashed and decided to just type a story while he waited for help, then just left his phone and walked away? That doesn't make sense. And the truck was crazy. It was more of a tank than a truck. I don't think writers would really drive stuff like that. And there were a bunch of weapons too. I didn't touch them though. I'm wearing pretty thick gloves, but I can't risk getting any of my DNA on a firearm. I'm out on probation right now. There were prints leading away from the truck at least. Only one set though, and they were huge. I mean seriously. This guy was big, barefoot too. I hope he made it out all right. I'm walking back to my house while typing this. I still don't know what to make of it. The only way it adds up is if the story is real, but it can't be, right? I mean, I would have seen something by now. Whatever. I already told the cops and they're on the way. They'll figure it out and I'll read about it in the paper tomorrow. I'm just going to focus on getting home now. It's starting to snow pretty heavily again, and the wind's picking up. I hope it's not a blizzard.